These two best friends went camping with their pregnant wives, and the two wives vanished while their husbands were away for some minutes to fetch firewood. 9 years later, their husbands found out what really happened. Sit back and enjoy this story as it unfolds. Thomas Jeggings and Tommy Harvey were the kind of friends people envied, two boys who met in childhood and never drifted, not even for a second. Their bond was built on scraped knees, shared secrets, and the quiet promise that they would conquer life side by side. They went to the same schools, cheered for the same sports teams, and somehow always ended up dreaming the same dreams. By the time they were old enough to understand love, they made a pact most people would laugh at. They would get married on the same day to the women they loved and start their families as brothers in spirit, not just in friendship. Thomas found love early. His relationship was steady, warm, and comforting, the kind of love everyone thought would last forever. Tommy's path wasn't as smooth. He stumbled through heartbreaks and wrong choices, always believing he'd never catch up to the future he and Thomas had drawn in the air as kids. But life surprised him. 2 years after meeting a woman who softened all his rough edges, Tommy finally felt certain. With trembling hands and hopeful eyes, he proposed. She said yes. And when he told Thomas, something magical happened. Their old childhood dream lit up again. That night, the two men danced, laughed, and clapped each other on the back as if the world had just given them permission to breathe. They picked a wedding date together, not out of obligation, but out of sheer joy. For a moment, it felt like nothing in this world could break the bond between these two brothers by choice. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. The wedding day arrived like a fairy tale wrapped in sunlight. 2 grooms, 2 brides, one aisle split in the middle with flowers that looked like they were growing out of a dream. People in town said they had never seen anything like it. A double wedding filled with so much love it felt almost unreal. Guests whispered that Thomas and Tommy weren't just friends. They were destiny stitched into human form. Their brides, glowing with joy, walked down the aisle at the same exact moment. And when the vows were exchanged, it felt as if 2 families had merged into one giant heartbeat. The celebration spilled late into the night. Music, laughter, dancing, every moment felt like it had been dipped in gold. The town talked about it for months. Some said the wedding would be remembered for decades. Others swore they had never witnessed happiness so contagious. Then, as though the universe wanted to bless their bond even more, something remarkable happened. Both brides became pregnant around the same time. When Thomas shared the news with Tommy, Tommy burst into laughter before he could even finish the sentence. It was as if their lives were unfolding in perfect symmetry, one miracle stepping neatly behind the other. The 2 families grew even closer. They attended doctor appointments together, shopped for baby clothes together, and even argued playfully about whose baby would arrive first. The wives bonded too, sharing cravings, fears, and late-night conversations about motherhood. As the pregnancies progressed and their due dates drew nearer, the friends began feeling a soft ache in their hearts. Soon, everything would change. Sleepless nights, crying bobbies, responsibilities stacked higher than dreams. With this in mind, the idea surfaced naturally, almost urgently. One last adventure, just the 4 of them. One last moment to breathe before life demanded everything. They chose a quiet, secluded camping ground, far from noise, far from people, far from the world. The campsite glowed softly under the early evening sky, joyful moment of 2 couples who had become more like one family. Laughter drifted into the quiet forest as Thomas teased Tommy about his lack of cooking skills, and Tommy fired back with jokes about Thomas, overprotectiveness toward his unborn child. Their wives sat close together, wrapped in blankets, exchanging baby name ideas like children swapping secrets. Every few minutes, one of them would place a hand on her belly, feeling the tiny kicks that reminded them of the life ahead. It was peaceful, The kind of peace people wish they could bottle and keep forever. The campfire crackled softly. Fireflies blinked like floating stars. Everything felt warm, safe, and beautifully ordinary. As the fire began to dim, Thomas stood up and dusted off his hands. "We need more firewood," he said. Tommy agreed immediately, grabbing his jacket. Their wives waved them off playfully, telling them not to go far and not to take too long. Thomas smiled at his wife, kissed her forehead, and promised, back in a few minutes. The men walked into the trees, talking about fatherhood, imagining tiny hands and first words. In that short walk, their hearts were light. They believed they were stepping into a future lined with laughter, not the darkness waiting to swallow them whole. It couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. When they returned, firewood in hand, the world felt wrong. The blankets were still there. The cups still warm. The faint echo of laughter still hanging in the air. But the wives were gone. No shouts. No signs of struggle. No footprints leading away. Just an eerie, suffocating silence that wrapped around the men like a pair of cold hands. Tommy dropped the firewood instantly. "Emma," he called. "Nothing." Thomas's voice cracked as he shouted his wife's name again and again, each echo sounding more desperate than the last. Two heavily pregnant women could not vanish into thin air. They could not run. They could not hide. Yet the clearing gave them nothing, no clues, no noise, no explanation. Only one terrifying question remained. How could two pregnant women disappear from a quiet campsite without making a single sound? News of the disappearance tore through the town like a storm with no warning. Within hours, neighbors were knocking on doors, offering help, whispering theories, and praying for miracles. By nightfall, the story had spread beyond the town. Local stations broadcast the emergency alert, and by morning, national outlets had picked it up. Two pregnant women vanish without a trace. It was the kind of headline that paralyzed a community. Search parties formed instantly. Dozens of volunteers combed the woods with flashlights and trembling hope. Helicopters sliced through the sky, sending leaves swirling in circles below. Search dogs sniffed through mud, brush, creek beds, anywhere two women might have wandered. But every search ended the same way. Nothing, no footprints, no clothing, no remains. Just absence. As days bled into weeks, the frenzy only grew. Cameras appeared outside Thomas and Tommy's homes. Reporters dug into their pasts. Commentators speculated. Social media buzzed with theories, some logical, most cruel. And slowly, painfully, suspicion turned toward the husbands. How convenient the wives vanished while the men were away. Why didn't they hear anything? Are they hiding something? The questions became accusations. Even with no evidence, whispers were enough to stain their reputations. Jobs were lost. Friendships crumbled. People crossed the street to avoid them. They became the shadows of the men they once were. Years passed, each one carving deeper into their spirits. Birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, all became reminders of the lives they should have had. Thomas grew quiet, moving through his days like a man underwater. Tommy battled sleepless nights, waking from nightmares where he saw his wife walking toward him, only to vanish before he could touch her. Neither remarried, neither moved on. They lived half-lives, waiting for answers that refused to come. Then came the 9th-year anniversary of their disappearance. Tommy wasn't looking for memories that day. He was simply clearing out old drawers, trying to declutter a space that still smelled faintly of her perfume. His hands shook as he picked up old photographs, trinkets, forgotten letters. And then, pushed against the back of the drawer, he found something he had never seen before. A diary. His wife's diary. He stared at it, as though touching it might shatter him all over again. He had no idea that inside those worn pages lay the spark that would reopen the case and expose the truth that had been hiding in plain sight for 9 long years. Tommy sat on the edge of his bed with the diary resting in his palms, its worn cover soft from years of being touched, just not by him. He opened it carefully, almost afraid that the words inside might hurt more than the memories. At first, the entries were innocent. Little notes about cravings, baby kicks, jokes Thomas and Tommy had cracked during dinner. He smiled weakly through the ache in his chest. But then he turned to a page dated months before she vanished, and froze. There, written in her familiar looping handwriting, were the words that would stop his heartbeat cold. "I'm happy I left Sean for good. Life with Tommy has been different. Sean was a time waster, and even though I know he can be a dangerous man and do dangerous things to have me back, I am never leaving the family I'm building with Tommy. I will grow old with him." Tommy felt the air drain from the room. Sean. He knew that name. His wife had mentioned him once casually, an ex who wasn't right for her, but she never said anything about how dangerous he could be, never hinted at fear, never suggested a past she was trying to escape. His hands trembled as the meaning settled in. If she had been afraid of Sean, if Sean had known where she was going, could he have found her that night? His mind spiraled. He flipped through the next pages, searching for more, for anything, but the diary turned coldly silent on the subject. One sentence, one warning, one crack in the mystery he had been drowning in for 9 years. Desperate for answers, Tommy grabbed his wife's old phone from the memory box he kept hidden away. Dead. He plugged it in, waited, and opened her social media accounts. Speed scrolling through the posts, he checked comments, tags, anything that might connect her to Sean. Then his chest tightened. She had posted about the camping trip. Not just a casual mention. She posted the location, the date, the excitement of spending a quiet weekend in nature with Thomas and Tommy. The post was public, bright, beautifully captioned, and filled with comments from friends and strangers. But one comment stopped him cold. Under the smiling picture of his wife holding her belly, a username he thought would belong to Sean, OG Sean, made a comment under the post. "I still miss you every day." A direct message from the past. A quiet confession. A crackling spark of obsession. Tommy's breathing went shallow, his skin prickled. This wasn't coincidence, this wasn't nostalgia. This was a warning they had never seen. Hands shaking, he grabbed his phone and dialed the police. For the first time in 9 years, his voice carried something it had forgotten long ago: urgency. "Please," he said, trembling. "You need to reopen the case. I think I know who took our wives." The moment Tommy handed over the diary entry and the Instagram screenshot, the atmosphere inside the police station shifted. Detectives who had once treated the case as a tragic dead end suddenly sat upright, exchanging glances heavy with possibility. They began digging into Sean's background, something no one had thought to do 9 years earlier. Within hours, his record surfaced. 2 convictions, both violence-related. 1 for assault, 1 for stalking. This wasn't a harmless ex. This was a man capable of obsession, and worse. Detectives called Sean in for a routine inquiry, careful not to mention the missing wives. They treated it like a background check, a formality connected to an old report. But the moment he walked into the room, something felt off. His eyes darted too quickly. His hands twitched. He tried to smile, but it never touched his face. "Where were you on the night of June 14th, 9 years ago?" a detective asked casually. Sean didn't hesitate. He checked through the calendar. It was on a Tuesday. "At work, definitely," he said, leaning back confidently. But investigators knew better than to trust easy answers. They contacted his workplace, requested the logs, checked entry records, security scans. And then the truth hit. Sean hadn't shown up to work that day, not even for a minute. When confronted, his confidence evaporated. He stuttered. He sweated. But detectives had come prepared. One slid a printed screenshot across the table. The Instagram comment. The one under Tommy's wife's camping post. I still miss you every day. Sean's face drained of color. His hand stopped shaking. And in that frozen second, the detective saw it. The look of a man whose lies had finally run out of places to hide. Hours had passed in the interrogation room. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, but Sean's breathing was louder, shaky, uneven. Detectives had stopped raising their voices. They just waited, watching him unravel. And finally, something inside him snapped. His shoulders slumped. His eyes glossed over. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, he whispered. He confessed that he had gone to the maternity camp with 3 gang members. His target wasn't random, it was personal. His ex-girlfriend, heavily pregnant and trying to start a new life, was staying there. He wasn't ready to let her go. I just wanted her back, he muttered, tears streaking down his face. I loved her. I still do. But when they reached the camp, things spiraled. They didn't know they would meet 2 pregnant women there, so in a panic, they grabbed both pregnant women. The truth of what happened next weighed on the room like a storm. In captivity, Thomas' wife began wheezing violently. Her asthma inhaler had been left behind in the chaos of the kidnapping. Sean described how she gasped, clawed at the air, and slowly fell still. No one could help her. Tommy's wife, terrified and disoriented, fainted, never waking again. The gang panicked when the pregnant women's pulse stopped. They buried both bodies quickly, hoping no one would trace the crime back to them. With trembling hands, Sean listed the names of the 3 accomplices. Hours later, under the heavy moonlight, officers dug at the spot he described and unearthed the remains that finally told the truth. Sean and his 3 accomplices were taken into custody under heavy police guard, their faces pale, knowing the walls of justice were closing in. The town buzzed with anticipation. For nearly a decade, everyone had wondered if the truth would ever come to light. Now it finally had. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. Journalists jostled for space, neighbors whispered, and friends and family of the victims filled the benches, some holding back tears, others clenching fists. At the center of it all, Thomas and Tommy sat together, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on the defendants, hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and long-denied hope. The trial unfolded with painstaking detail. Every piece of evidence, Sean's confession, the gang's involvement, social media posts, and the grim forensic reports, was presented. The jury leaned forward in rapt attention. Witnesses recounted the day of the disappearance. Every detail layered the story of betrayal, obsession, and murder. When the cause of the wives' deaths was read aloud, describing Thomas' wife's fatal asthma attack and Tommy's wife's collapse, the room seemed to still. Both men crumpled, crying openly for the first time in 9 years, grief flooding their bodies with the force of memories they had buried deep. Years of pain, confusion, and longing poured out in helpless sobs. The judge's gavel eventually broke the silence, signaling the gravity of the moment. Evidence presented beyond doubt, testimonies unbroken, and confessions verified. The law had the full picture. Now, all that remained was the sentence, the final act that would bring justice to the lives stolen and the families shattered. The room held its breath as the judge prepared to speak. The courtroom was silent as the judge's gavel fell for the final time. Sean and his 3 accomplices had been found guilty on every count: kidnapping, first-degree murder, and conspiracy. The sentence was read slowly, deliberately: death by hanging. A collective exhale swept through the room, a release of tension 9 years in the making. For the first time in nearly a decade, the town felt a fragile sense of peace, as though the shadow that had haunted every street, every corner, had finally lifted. Outside, neighbors and townspeople lingered, whispering among themselves. The news would travel fast. Justice had finally caught up with the men who had stolen so much. But no amount of relief could erase the pain etched into Thomas and Tommy's hearts. The husbands made their way to the gravesite of their wives, their steps slow, weighted with the memories of the night that had changed everything. Flowers were clutched in their hands, trembling slightly as they approached the freshly turned earth. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of soil and blooms, and a gentle wind seemed to whisper through the trees, carrying the echoes of the lives that had been lost too soon. Thomas knelt, placing the flowers carefully, his voice breaking as he finally spoke. "We finally know the truth. They didn't leave us. They were taken." Tommy knelt beside him, hands gripping the stems of the flowers, his eyes wet but resolute. And now they can rest. For the first time in years, the weight on their shoulders seemed to lift slightly. Though the loss would never fully fade, the certainty of the truth and the knowledge that justice had been served offered a measure of solace. They stood together, united by grief and memory, staring at the graves that now held the closure they had long sought. The town moved forward, quieter, wiser, and a little more cautious of the darkness that can hide behind familiar faces. But for Thomas and Tommy, amidst the pain, there remained a fragile hope, a belief that love, even in tragedy, could endure. If you really enjoyed this video, like and comment your opinion below, and also subscribe to this channel to enjoy more crime-related content every day.